So hi, welcome to the first ever SolidusConf workshop. This workshop should serve as a starter guide for using ReactJS with Solidus. Now, before I get started with introductions, we're going to run this like a follow-along tutorial. So if you're inclined to follow along, you'll need to be set up with a vanilla Solidus installation. I say that first because if you don't have that set up, I want you to have the time to do that while I introduce myself. You don't have to follow along if you don't want to, but I find it's helpful to gain a good understanding of how things work. If you are new to the platform, you can find instructions for installing Solidus on the Solidus GitHub repository, but I also have a vanilla Solidus store set up that you can use at the link here, which I'll post in chat. I'll be posting a lot of links in chat, so links and code and whatnot, so keep an eye out for that. So there's some instructions in the README, just make sure you follow all of them and you should be set up. Also, there is a lot to cover and I'll try not to go too fast, but we will need to move through this presentation pretty quickly if we want to get done. So if you need me to slow down a bit, just let me know in the chat and I'll do what I can. But also keep in mind that this presentation is being recorded and will be released on YouTube in the coming weeks. So don't worry too much if you fall behind, you can always pick up later. Lastly, this is going to be a longer presentation than normal, so if your bandwidth allows it, I'd highly recommend using some background music at a low volume. It just so happens that Will Smith's Lo-Fi playlist is about the same length as this presentation, so I recommend using that. I'll post a link in the chat and give you guys a second to get set up. Now, with that out of the way, allow me to introduce myself. Hi, I'm Sean. I'm a developer at Nebulab and the main organizer for SolidusConf. In my free time, I like to hike. Here's some pictures from last year's conference hike at Donut Falls. It was a lot of fun and I can't wait to continue the SolidusConf hiking tradition next year. I also like to play music. I play guitar and piano. Back in my teenage years, I played in a shoegaze jam band. This is us opening up for Lil White at the New Daisy Theater in Memphis, Tennessee. And that's me in the robot suit. I got my start in web development at the age of 11 when my dad taught me HTML. This is the first website I ever built, zeldacraziness.tripod.com. As you can see, it's a great approximation of what a 90s kid thinks the internet should be. This is my wife, Amanda. Our fourth anniversary is in 2 weeks. She is a constant source of inspiration to me, and I'm so lucky to have her in my life. My presentation is titled, sorry, getting adjusted here, The Solidus Guide to ReactJS, and here are our goals for today. First, we're going to do an introduction to ReactJS, so we understand what we're working with. We'll install everything we need to get up and running and set up some defaults. We're going to rebuild the Solidus product page in ReactJS, which should give us a basic understanding of how to work with React in the context of Rails. And last, we'll review what we've learned and take a well-deserved rest. So first up, the ReactJS introduction. The most important thing to note about ReactJS is this: it's mostly just JavaScript. If you know JavaScript, then there's a good chance that you'll be able to pick up ReactJS fairly quickly. If you don't know JavaScript, you'll be in for a slightly rougher ride, but just remember, don't panic. There's a ton of documentation and resources for JavaScript and React. All you have to do is consult your guide to the galaxy, Google. So, other than being primarily JavaScript, what is React? What's its purpose? So if you look at the official description of React, it's a JavaScript library meant for building user interfaces, which isn't very descriptive. So to me, these are the things that make React stick out. First, it's an intersection of HTML and JavaScript, allowing the two to coexist. You write HTML and JavaScript together with very little separation. And second, it allows for some really cool optimization. If the information on one React component changes, that component is the only thing updated. You don't have to wait for everything else on the page to update as well. And that means that you can set it up so that when the user navigates to a new page, all the CSS and JavaScript and header and footer nonsense, that all stays where it's at. the user only needs to load the information immediately relevant to the new page. And that essentially eliminates the need to wait for page loads once the page is initially loaded in. So here's a quick rundown of how it works. First, we render a component. This just displays whatever we want to the user. You can see that we import React at the top there. We define a test class, render an empty tag with the text, "So long and thanks for all the fish" in it. At the end, we export the class that we created so that it can be used. So it's nothing too complicated. It looks a lot like JavaScript. The only thing to point out here is the empty tag. That's called a React fragment. You can also write it out as a react.fragment tag, or you can just use a div or a span or whatever you want to. The only difference is that a React fragment won't be added to the DOM, so it'll be ignored when it's compiled. Next, we're going to give it state. You can see that we've added a construct function to the component. So the first thing that our constructor does is it supers. If you're familiar with what super does, you just need to know that a React component already has a constructor function, and we've just overridden it. So super just makes sure that the original constructor is also run. The next line defines state for the component. It tells us that there's supposed to be a fish string within the state and sets its initial value to salmon. And you can see in our text here that we've also replaced the word fish with the fish state. The curly brackets used just lets the compiler know that what's inside is JavaScript. And now whatever is in the state as fish is displayed in the HTML there. And that's it. Anytime we update the fish state, anything that uses that state will also update, including the text. And that's React in a nutshell. Now, there's a lot more to know, like using props and subcomponents and lifecycle methods, but that's enough to get us started for this presentation. So now that we know a little bit about React and how it works, I think we're going to get started. I want to take a quick second here just to check the chat, make sure that you guys are ready, and make sure that you also have your console up and your text editor of choice with the Solidus store that you're using. All right. So let's get started. We're going to go to our vanilla Solidus stores. For this presentation, we're going to use the React Rails extension. So I'm going to add that down here. So you're in your gem file, you're just going to add gem React Rails. Save that. I will try to post most of what I'm writing in the chat so that you guys can copy and paste if you're not comfortable writing it out yourselves. I'm also going to try to pause after I do anything like this to allow you guys to do it on your end as well. Okay, so we've added the gem to our gem file. We're going to go over to our console, and we're going to run a couple of commands. First, bundle. So right now we're installing the gem. All right, and then we're going to run, I'll post this in the chat first, Rails webpacker :install. Now Rails already comes packaged with Webpacker, so I don't think that this step is actually necessary, but the README of React Rails says to do it, so we're just going to go ahead and do it. All right, let that run its course. Next command we're going to run is Rails webpacker :install :react, which I've just posted in the chat. Go ahead and pop that in and wait for it to finish. All right, and the last thing we're going to run is Rails generate React : install. Just give that a second to run. This might be hanging. I don't recall this. Oh boy. All right, 1 second. Terminate that terminal. There we go. Okay, that was almost disastrous. Okay, so that's set up. Hopefully nobody's had any issues yet. There is one more thing we need to do, but we're going to go back to our code for this. We're going to app, JavaScript, packs, and application.js. So this file here. We're going to remove this line that requires Rails/UJS. And the reason we're doing that is that Solidus already requires UJS, and UJS kind of freaks out if there are multiple versions of it required. So just for simplicity's sake, we're defaulting over to what Solidus has. Okay, so now that we're all set up here, I'm just going to commit real quick. You guys don't have to follow along with this, but I think it's helpful to have a history. So git add dot, which adds everything to the to be committed list, and then git commit, and I'll do -m and just install React. Bam. All right, so that was easy. Hopefully nobody has run into any problems yet. What we're going to do now, I head back here, is we're going to rebuild the Solidus product page in ReactJS. So first, we need to go to the Solidus repository and find the front-end product views. I'll post them in chat, the link to that chat here, but I already have it pulled up right here. Specifically, we're looking for this show.html.erb file here. We're going to override this file because we don't want to display what Solidus wants to display. We want to display what we want to display. So you guys are probably familiar with how to override files, but just in case, we're going to app, views, and we're going to create a new folder. Spree, and then a subfolder, products. So views, Spree, products. And within that file, we're going to create a file called show.html.erb. And since it's named the same thing as the Solidus file is named, it will default to showing what we have here rather than what Solidus has. All right, and we're also going to add this line to the new file, which I'll post in chat, JavaScript pack tag application. This is what's actually going to load in the React stuff and make it work. Normally you would put this in the header or something, but we're being lazy today, so putting it straight into show. All right, so now we start building our component structure. We're going to structure our components. Components are like views for React. That's something different. Where am I? Who am I? Okay, yeah, so we're going to structure them similarly to how they're structured here. So cart form, image, we're not going to copy over promotions, but we'll do, I think, the rest of these. And index, of course, is a different page, so we won't use that one as well. So to do that, we're going to go under app JavaScript components. This is where our components are going to live. I'm going to create a new folder just to keep everything separated and call it products with a capital P. I typically use Pascal case for anything React just to, it's easier for me just to see that there's a distinction between like a React file and a herb file or something. So within this folder, we're going to create all of those views, but as JS files. So I'm going to create show.js with a capital S. We'll create image.js with a capital I. Thumbnails.js. Properties.js. Taxons.js. And the last one is cartform.js, capital C and F. One word. All right, so that seems like a lot to get through, right? It's going to be a lot easier than it seems. Okay, so we're going to write a quick test component to make sure that it's working. I'll post a link to, I've already pre-written a test component. I'll post a link to it here. Let me make sure that links to the right place. Yeah. So this is our test component. Just head over here and copy all of this. And we'll put this in show.js. So just paste it and save. While we're here, we're also going to just paste this into all the other files that we just created. You'll have to keep in mind that as we do that, we're going to change this class name and where we export the class name here, just to match whatever file we're in. So I'm going to post it in cart form. We'll change the class and export both to cart form. Image, same thing. Properties. Taxons. And thumbnails. Okay, so now that we have working components, we're going to add the show.js component to the show.html.erb file that we created. So head back to view, spree, products, show.html.erb. I'll paste this in chat. We're going to add that, this React component products show line at the end of this file. And that's just going to go into the components folder and find products show and then return whatever's being exported there. Okay, so we should, in theory, have a working React component on our website. So let's boot up our server and check it out. So I'm just going to Rails S. Server started, that's a good sign. And oh, I'm on the wrong file here. Here we are. Oh my. Oh my, something very wrong. Let me try that one more time. All right. Wow, that was weird. Anyways, we have a working Solidus store. Let's go over to the product show page. Let it take its time. Look at that. So on the product show page, we're displaying right here, this is the output of the React component that we have under show.js. So we have a working React component on our site. That's fantastic. I hope everybody's still on board. I'm going to do a quick commit just to celebrate. So git add dot git commit dash m add test components. Awesome. All right, so now we're going to copy over show code from the show.html.erg file here in the Solidus repository. So head back to where that is. In here, I'm just going to click raw just to get the raw text so I can Control A, copy everything. And heading back to show.js, we're going to paste it in this return block here. So just replace this entire div with what you copied. I'm just gonna fix the tabbing. Okay, so now we can start formatting this into JSX. It's not gonna be as hard as it sounds. The very first thing we need to do is if you have a find and replace function, you should pull that up. Find every instance of class equals and replace it with class name with a capital M equals. Now, the reason we're doing this is that React doesn't work well with the class attribute. They prefer you to use class name instead. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think class might be like a reserved word in React or something, but yeah, regardless, we just do what React wants us to do. All right, awesome. And we're going to take this cache line here, the very first line of what we copied, and remove that because we're not going to do any caching. And at the bottom where the cache ends, we'll just remove this line as well. And retab that. Okay. So now there's still a bit of Ruby code in here. Oh, I'm just going to remove this body ID setter here too. That's kind of useless for our purposes. So now there's still a bunch of Ruby code here that we need to replace. There's a lot of render partials. So let's do that in React. First thing we need to do is import the other JavaScript files that we've created into this file so that we can use them. So at the top of the file here, after import React, we're going to import, we'll just start at the top, cart form from, in a string, /cart form. I'll paste these in chat as I go along. Hope you guys are following along. Import image from /image. All right. Import properties from /properties. Import taxons from /taxons. And import thumbnails from /thumbnails. Okay. I'll give you guys a second to get that put in. If you guys need me to increase my text size or anything, just give me a shout in the chat. All right. So now that we're importing the code, we need to display it instead of rendering the partials in Ruby. We need to render the components in React. And it's very easy. Rendering a component in React is the same thing as you do the same thing as what you do when you create a div tag or something. So for this partial image, we're just going to open a tag, call it image, and then make it self-closing with that ending slash. And that's it. That'll import all of the JavaScript that we've got in image.js directly here. I'm using a self-closing tag, but you could also do something like image and then /image if you wanted to, but just this is what we're doing here. Okay, so we've got the image being pulled in. We'll go ahead and replace the rest. So thumbnails is here, that ending /. We'll remove the partial properties here. Now we are not importing promotions, so I'm just going to remove this whole div block. Okay, closer to the bottom, there's two more we have to do, one for cart form. So cart form. And one for taxons. Okay, so now we've just got two pieces of Ruby code left, one that displays the product name and one that displays the product description. To replace those bits of code, we need to be getting this information from the API. So before we do that, let's set up our state up here, which we're just using to store a name. We're going to use this to store the data about the product that we know we need to have. So we know that we need a name, and it's already got a name. That's great. This is the default name that's going to be displayed before we get any data. So I'm just going to replace it with loading ... That way, when the customer comes to the page, they'll see loading ... and then it'll be replaced with the product information. The next thing, just add a comma there, new line. We'll add a description and default it to empty string. And to access the API, we need to know what URL we're at. So just for the ease of things, we're going to add a path state and set the default to window.location.pathname, which will get the current path. Okay, so now that we've got a place to store our name description, we can actually go ahead and replace this Ruby code here. Since we know where we're storing it, we're just going to take this herb block here and replace it with empty curly brackets. And in the curly brackets, we'll put this .state.name. And now this is going to fetch whatever is in the namestate. And we'll do the same with the description. There's a rescue here, but we're not going to worry about that. This .state.description. Okay, so we still need to actually get this information from the API, but importantly, we've just removed all of the Ruby code from this file, so we should be able to load it. Let's do that real quick just to test. So I'll start up my server again. And we will head to wrong tab. There we go. So you can see it's using our default loading name here, and this would be where the description would be if we had one. And all these other high shawns are the other components that we're now loading in as well. So yeah, that looks fantastic. Now we can start setting up the API call and actually getting some relevant information. So there's one step we need to do before we actually delve into that, and that is disabling authentication. The Solidus API requires authentication, but we don't really care about it in the context of this app. So if you will head to, let's see, where is this at? I think it's under config. Yeah, config initializers spree.rb. And all the way at the bottom of this file is a line that sets the API config to require authentication. It sets it to true. We're just going to change that to false. Or if you're fancy, do not true. But I'm not fancy. Awesome. So our API is set up. Now we can head back to show.js. We're going to create a new method here. We'll call it, and this is above the render block, we'll call it get product with a capital P. And I'm going to write this in kind of a weird way. I'll explain why in a second, but it's going to be equals empty parentheses, hash rocket, and curly brackets. post that in chat. They reformat that arrow a little weirdly. I hope that copy's over right. Anyways, so we're writing it this way because the function needs to be bound to the class, and this is just sort of a shorthand way to bind the function to the class so that we can call it using something like this.getProduct. You could also do something like getProduct, write it like a normal function, and then in the constructor you can do this.getProduct equals this.getProduct.bind. But that's, again, I'm not fancy. Shorthand will do. So I had an enter there. All right, what do we need? So, of course, this is going to be our API call function. This is what's going to actually get the information from the API. And we know that we need to get the information from the API when the page loads. So we need to set up a way to call this function when the page loads. And the easy way to do that is to write out component did with a capital D, mount with a capital M. It's just going to be a standard JavaScript function. This function runs anytime the component mounts, obviously. So we'll type this.getProduct in the interior of this function, and anytime the component mounts now, it'll get the product's information. Okay, now to actually get the API, I'll tell you what, I'm going to copy and paste what I'm about to write in the chat first. I think it formats it all to be on one line, so I'm sorry about that. And then I'll explain what it is while I'm writing it out. So we're going to fetch from the API, and fetch needs a URL, so we'll give it /API and then add the this.state.path to it, which is the current path that you're on. The cool thing about the Solidus API is if you want to get product information, it's the same path as the front-end product URL, just with /API added to it. Okay, and then we're going to take that response and format it into JSON. So response #rocket response.json. And then we're going to take that response, which is now JSON, #rocket curly brackets. And for now, we're just going to console.log it. Yeah, and I think that's right. Only one way to find out. Let's try it out. Wrong tab. Here we are. So I'll open my console here. You see there's a couple of warnings here about using item prop instead of item prop with a capital P. We're just going to ignore those for now. It doesn't break anything. Actually, I need to restart my server because we just changed an initializer and that code only runs when the server starts. So restarting my server and then refreshing, we get, look at that, product information. So we're console logging this. We're going to probably just keep doing that because it's useful to have this here as a reference. So after where we console log it, we're going to set the state to equal this new information. So this.setState with a capital S, parentheses, curly brackets, and we know we're going to add a bunch of stuff here. So we're just going to create a new line. We'll set the name to be equal to response.name and the description to be equal to response.description. I'll paste this whole block in here. Okay, let's try it out. Look at that. So the product's name is in there, the product description is in there, and it works nearly instantaneously. That's awesome. So we have a working API call. It populates the product. I think this is as good a time as any to do a commit. So we'll do git commit -am. The -a flag just adds everything before it actually commits. Finish show component. Okay, so we're going to take a quick break here before moving on. Hopefully you guys haven't had any issues. If you have, please let me know in the chat, and I will see what we can do about them. Otherwise, we're just going to take a quick, say like 2 minutes to breathe, drink some water, stretch, whatever you need to do before we move on. All right, so hopefully you guys got a good stretch in, drank some water, all that good stuff. I know I did. We can get back to rebuilding the product page. We just finished the show component, so we're going to go ahead and start setting up the other partials. We're going to start with an easy one, hopefully, taxons. Now, before we get to the taxons component, we're going to stay in the show component here because we know that we're going to need some information on the taxons component, and we're going to just get that information from the show component and pass it on to the taxons component. So in the state here, we're going to add a new line, and we'll add taxons and default it to empty array. Okay, now that we have it stored, we can pass it on to the taxons component, and we can do that by going down to where taxons is here. And just like you would set an ID or a class or something, you can also pass things into taxons by doing this, taxons equals, and then in curly brackets, this.state.taxons. Okay, so we have a place to store it. We're sending it down to taxons. Now we need to actually just get it from the API. Excuse me. So in our states that are here, we'll add a new line after description. And let me see. This is a roundabout way of getting the taxon. So I'll post it in the chat first and explain it in a second. So we're going to set taxons, the taxon state to be equal to response.classifications.map and 2 parentheses, classification outside of the first pair of parentheses, hash rocket. Oh, actually, classification.taxon. I think that's right. Yeah, so the reason we're getting it this way is if we go back to our API call here, you can see that while it is returning a list of taxon IDs, that's not super helpful to us. The taxon information itself is stored under classifications, and a classification is just a connection between a product and a taxon. So we have to go through each of these classifications and then find the taxon object within that classification, which has all the information that we need. All right, so make sure that's saved. That's all we need to do in show.js. We're going to start working on taxons.js now. If we head back to the Solidus repository, head back to this products folder, and we'll go to the right here, which is the taxons partial. So we're just going to copy all of this code, bring it over here, and then within the return block, just like before, fix it out. Okay, so just like before, we're going to do a find and replace every instance of class equals with class name equals. Okay, so this first line checks to see if the products, whether or not the product has any taxons. If it doesn't, then it displays nothing. So we need to replicate that in React. So outside of this return block, but inside of the render block, I'm going to add a new line. We'll just put a basic if statement here. So if, what are we doing? This.props.taxons. So we're passing taxons from show.js, where it's sort of state, into taxons.js. And when we pass it like that, it becomes properties of whatever file that you're working in. So instead of this being this.state.taxons, it's now this.props.taxons. So we'll check the length of that. and we'll check to see if it equals 0, which would be no taxons. And if that's the case, then in curly brackets, we'll just put return null. So it will essentially return nothing. And just add an else statement there, else, and then this entire return block, and then make sure that the else statement is ended at the end there. I'll post this bit of code in chat. Okay, so now we've got this handled. I'll go ahead and remove this line of code here and here, which ends that if statement. Retab it. All right, so now we can start replacing some of the other Ruby bits here and there. This is a translation block, so this spits out a translation for look for similar items. We're not really going to care about that. I18N does work with ReactJS, and it's fairly easy to get set up, but that's not really on our roadmap here, so I'm just going to type this out in English. Look for similar items. Okay, so now we need to replace this bit, and this iterates over the taxons and then displays a list item with some information inside. So that should be pretty easy. What we're going to do is this.props.taxons, and we'll map over those. We'll pass in taxon and index, hash rocket, and new line. Oops. Just that in chat. Okay, so now we're iterating over taxons. We just need to replace this line here, so we'll add a list tag. And then within that list tag, there is a link, and the link displays the taxon's name. So that should be pretty easy. I'll just in that link tag here, we'll create a link, a ref, and then instead of a string, we're passing in curly brackets. And it's going to be as a string /t/ because that's the taxon namespace. And then we'll add the taxon.permalink to that. And then end the tag there. And then within that link, we're just going to display the taxon.name. Okay, so now we can delete this Ruby code. This has no more Ruby code and should work as intended. So let's give it a quick test. Start this first. Okay. Look at that. Look for similar items, t-shirts and Solidus. These links should work. Yep, they work great. Amazing. Okay, so just like before, we got done with a new component, so I'm just going to git commit -am finish taxons component. Awesome. Let's do properties next. If we head back to show.js, we know that we're going to need to add it to a state and pass it down and get it from the API fetch. So we'll start with the state. We're going to add properties, and empty array is the default. We'll go ahead and pass that down to properties, which is right here. So properties equals, and then curly brackets, this.state.properties. All right, and now we need to get it from the fetch call here. So after this long taxons block, comma, let's see. All right, so we're going to set properties to be equal to response.product_properties. And if you ever want to double check, just we're logging our API here, our API response here, and it is stored under product properties. Yeah, so we're storing it, we're getting it, we're sending it. Let's head over to the properties.js file. Just like before, we're going to copy the code over from Solidus. So here we are. All right, so head over here. We're just going to copy and paste right into this return block. Add everything back over. Let me see. All right, so just like before, this line just checks to see if the product properties are empty. If they are empty, it displays nothing. We know how to handle that in React, so I'm just going to remove these lines and we'll handle it in a second. But first, you should note that within this return block, we are now returning two things. We're returning this H6, and then we're returning this table. And that's a big no-no. Return only accepts one thing at a time. So we're going to surround it by an empty fragment tag, which is just open, close, open, slash, close. You could add a span here if you wanted to, or whatever, just empty tag is fine though. Okay, and then we'll write out the if statement here. So if this dot props dot properties, which is a bit weird, we may want to rename that in the future. We'll check the length and check if it equals 0. If it does, return null. Just be consistent with that spacing, I guess. Else, it returns everything in this block. And I'll just paste that in chat. Yeah, and if you are copying and pasting, just make sure that that closing tag is at the end of the return block, which is right here on line 30 on my screen. All right, now we can keep removing Ruby code. Here's another translate item. It just says properties. We'll just write that in English, properties. This reset cycle here, we'll go ahead and destroy that. That has to do with this class cycle here, which we'll get to in a second. And let me see. Yeah, now we just need to handle this iteration in the middle here. So let's do that. Write out this dot props dot properties dot map property and index hash rocket pasting that. All right, so now that we're iterating, we can start writing some of the interior. So we're going to display a TR and give it a class. I'm just going to set this class to empty brackets for now. You'll understand why in a second. I'm also going to give it a key. I don't know if I did this in the other file, but anytime that you iterate over anything with React, you want to pass in a key. It will complain if not. So I'm just going to give it the index as the key. And I'll end the TR there. Now for the class, you can see here that it cycles through even and odd based on the position of where it's at in the array. And we can replicate that very easily here. We're just going to write index mod 2 and check to see if it's 0. And we'll just do a ternary operator here. If it is 0, then we return even because it's an even number index. Else we're going to return odd. So this replicates this class cycling here. And let me paste that here. All right, so now we can keep writing this interior. There's a TD here with a strong inside. I'll just write that out and then close both tags as well. In the middle, it just displays the name of the product property. So we'll do this here. The property dot property name is what it's called. All right, so that will spit out the name. And then there's another TD here, which just displays the value, which is very simple, property dot value. Okay, now we can remove this Ruby code, and it should be working. So let's give it a test. Always forget to start my server. Bam, look at that. List of properties coming right from the API. Isn't that awesome? All right. Just like before, I'm going to do a quick commit. So git commit -am finish properties component. Just checking in the comments. Yeah, be sure to use class name with capital N. Am I not doing that here? Oh, actually, yeah, I forgot to do the class find all. So replace that with class name. It doesn't actually break the website, but it will spit out a bunch of nasty little warnings. You can see here that I did forget to add key under the taxons.js file. I'll do that real quick here. So this list should actually have a key in it. I'll pass an index. This is in the taxons.js file. I think in some of the newer versions of React, like you can still use class. I'm not 100% sure on that, but yeah, best practice just to use class name. Okay, so now we're going to do a really easy one. We're going to do this image.js. So just like before, head to show.js. We're going to need a place to store the image. So image, we'll just default it to empty string. I'm going to pass that to the image component. Image equals this.state.image. And then in our get product fetch here after properties, we'll set it. And this is going to be a little convoluted. I'll post this in chat first. Response.master.images, and we'll get the first image that we find, and then get its product URL. And you can play around with the API response just to see why we're doing it this way. But yeah, this will get the first image of the product at the correct size. So now we can head over to the image component, and we're not going to pull over any code or anything like that. We're just going to simply add an image tag to this return block. So delete what's there. Add image, give it a source, and source it from this.props.image. Make it a self-closing tag, and that's all we need to do there. This one's done. We'll give this a quick test as well, just to make sure we don't have any typos or anything. Oh no, I refreshed the wrong page. There we go, there's the product image. All right, I've lost my slide notes, so let me get those back up. Okay, so now that we have a product image, you know the drill. Git commit -am finish thumbnail. Oh, I'm on the wrong slide. Finish image component. Awesome. Okay, what's next? Thumbnails. Okay, so I'm sure you guys know the vanilla Solidus store, but there are usually thumbnails right here, and when you click them, they change this main image. We're going to replicate all of that. But first, we need to have a place to store the thumbnail. So head back to show.js. In the state, add thumbnails, and it's just going to be empty array. And we're passing it to thumbnails here. So thumbnails equals this.state.thumbnails. Okay, and now we need to get it from the API. Now this is going to be fairly complicated. So I'm going to copy and paste this whole thing into chat first. Yeah, so it's a lot, bear with me here. Get the response.master, which is the master product. We're not going to deal with variant images with this, just to keep things simple. So we'll get the master's images and then map through them. Image, hash rocket, open, parentheses, and curly brackets, and new line. In the new line, we're going to set the image to equal image.id. We'll set the mini URL of the image to equal image.mini URL. Oops. And the product URL of the image, you guessed it, image.product URL. Right, so these three things are necessary. We need the ID because whenever we click on the thumbnail, we need to know which thumbnail is actually being clicked on. The mini URL because that's the thumbnail's size of the thumbnail. And the product URL because that is what needs to replace the image state here so that the main image changes. Okay, so we're storing it, getting it, and sending it. Let's head over to thumbnails.js. And we're going to copy and paste this code from Solidus again. So Solidus thumbnails. Pasting the link here. And just copy and paste all of this in the return block. I'll just remove this comment here. Okay, so this first line checks to see if there are enough thumbnails to make sense, whether or not it makes sense to display the thumbnail code based on how many thumbnails there are. So if there's more than one thumbnail, then we want to display the thumbnail code. But if there's just one or zero, then we don't. So we'll do this in React, or JavaScript. If this.props.thumbnails, we'll check the length. If it's less than 2, then we will return null. Else, we'll return this entire block and end the tag there. So I'll paste that in chat. All right, now that we have that set up, we can remove this line that checks the size and the corresponding end tag there. Let me check the time. 2:03. Okay, we're doing good. What's next? So this whole block here, this Ruby block, checks to see if the product has variants, and if it does, it displays those images, but we're not doing variant images, so we're just going to remove that whole block. And then this here iterates over the images and displays the thumbnails. So we'll do that in JavaScript. This.props.thumbnails.map thumbnail index. Put that in the chat. Okay, and now we can write this interior. So we're going to create a list with make sure that we give it a key so that React doesn't complain, and give it a class. Oops, class name. Actually, while we're at it, before I forget, I'll also replace this class up here with class name. And this class name is tmb-all, and then tmb, and then some Ruby code. We're just going to take the tmb-all. And in that here, not sure why my editor is highlighting those. All right, inside of the list tag, we create a href because we want them to look like links. although they won't go anywhere. So in the ref, we're just going to type JavaScript : semicolon. And that'll make it look like a link, but it won't do anything. Then in the interior of that, image src, and pass in the thumbnail.mini URL. Okay, so now we can remove this Ruby code. Let's restart the server and check if it works. And check if my editor highlighting this means anything at all. Oh, turns out it does. Let's see what the error is. It's this /a here, unexpected token. Oh, I didn't end the image tag. Okay, so make sure you end the image tag. Let's try that again. Oh, another error. What's going on? Thumbnail is not defined. Typo on line 16. Thanks, Andrea. Aha. Man, typos, they get you every time. All right, awesome. We have thumbnails. Now, when you click them, they don't do anything, but we're going to get that set up shortly. In the meantime, though, we need to exit out of our server and do a quick commit. Git commit -am finish thumbnail component. And back to my slide here because it's time for intermission number 2. We've got the thumbnails working. We still need to work on the image change functionality, but before we do that, we're going to take a quick break. So just take, let's say, about 2 more minutes to stretch, grab some water, do whatever you need to do. If you've had any issues, post them in the chat. We'll see what we can do about them. And I'll see you very shortly. Hello again. We are back. Let's see where we left off. We had thumbnails working and we needed to get the image change functionality. So let's get to it. If we go back to our code under show.js, we have image and it's being set here, but we need to change it conditionally. So we're going to create a new function. Just add it under get product and we'll call it change image. And we're going to do the self-binding thing that I did earlier with get product, except in the empty parentheses, we'll add ID because we're passing an ID in. So I will post that here. All right, so like I said, we're going to use this ID to find the thumbnail. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll set a variable thumbnail singular and set it to be equal to this .state.thumbnails, which gets a list of the thumbnails, and then we'll filter through that image #rocket where image.id is equal to the ID that we're passing in. And since filter returns an array, we'll get the first item that matches. I'll post that as well. Okay, so we have the correct thumbnail. Now we just need to set the state of, set the image state to the thumbnail's product URL. So that's quite simple, this.setState. And then image thumbnail, which is this variable that we've set here, .product URL. Okay, so we've got a function that conditionally changes the main image that's being displayed. Now we need to trigger it. So we're going to take this function and we're going to pass it down to thumbnails. So just like passing down a state, you can also pass down functions. What did I name it? Change image. So we'll just name it the same thing, change image equals, and in curly brackets, this.change image. All right, heading down to the thumbnails component. Now we need to trigger that change image whenever the thumbnail is clicked on. So in this link that we've set up here that does nothing in the ref, we're going to add a new tag to it, on click with a capital C. So anytime this element is clicked, on click will be called, and we'll set it to be equal to curly brackets. And we're doing this kind of a weird way, bear with me. Open close parentheses, hash rocket, this dot props dot change image. So just like the state gets turned into props, anything you pass into it gets turned into props, even functions. And parentheses, because we're going to pass in thumbnail dot ID. And I'll just copy this whole line and paste it. There we are. And that should be it. Let's check. Okay, server started. Reloading. Bam. The main image now changes anytime you click on a thumbnail. That's awesome. All right, guys, we are almost done. There's only one more component that we need to pull over, and that is the cart form. So actually, I'm going to commit real quick. Add thumbnail change function, just to keep that history up to date. Okay, so before we get to the cart form, we're going to go back to show.js, and we're going to need two more pieces of information about the product. So I'll add it to the state first. It's going to be the ID. I'll just default that to 0. And the price, which I will default to just the empty string is fine. You can also default that to 0 if you wanted to. I don't think it really matters that much. We'll pass both of those pieces of information down to the cart form. So down here where we have the cart form element, I'll pass in ID, it's this dot state dot ID, and price as this dot state dot price. Yep, that looks right. And then up here in our state setter, which is slowly becoming gigantic, after this thumbnails block here, comma, set the ID, and I think that this is just simply response.id. And we'll also set the price, and I think it's also just response.price. Let me double check that with the API. Yeah, price. There's also display price, which is here and includes the $, but we'll just add that $sign in ourselves. All right. Yeah, that's all we need to do on show.js. Let's head over to cartform.js. And for the last time, we're going to go back to the Solidus code. We'll go here. And this is a very large file, so I'm going to click raw, copy everything there, and paste it in this return block. So this looks like a lot of code. Not to worry, we're going to be ripping a lot of it out very mercilessly. So to get started with that, first thing, this form 4 sets up a form in Rails. We're not going to use that form. So we're going to delete that first line and this last line that ends that. And I'll retab it. Okay, so this block here handles variant selection. And for the purposes of this demo, we're not going to handle variant selection. So I'm just going to delete this entire block. So from this if all the way to this end right here. All right, so this next line checks to see if the prices are applicable. If it is, it displays, let's see, where's the else? Yeah, it displays this whole block, and that's good. We want to display this block. If it isn't applicable, it displays this, but we're just going to assume that all prices are applicable, so I'll remove everything from this else to this end at the bottom. And I'll also remove this if statement here. Okay, and then last thing, this line here, well, last thing for this slide anyways, this line here checks to see if you can supply the product. If it does, it displays this item prop link thing. And if it doesn't, it says out of stock. We're just gonna delete this whole block. So from this if to this end, delete. All right, so already this has become a lot more manageable. We're going to go ahead and replace all the class equals with class name equals, just like before, just to stop React from complaining about it. Let's see, this I18N block, our line, we'll just replace it with English, so price. In this class name here, there's some ERB code that if the product has variance, it sets the class to omega. If it doesn't have variance, it sets it to alpha. We assume that this product doesn't have variance, so we'll just set it to alpha. All right, there are two content tags, and just for the ease of, I don't know, coding, I'm just going to remove both of the tags. So go ahead and remove that and that. Okay, so here's where the price is displayed. I'm going to remove the Ruby code and replace it with JavaScript. Actually, $, and then curly brackets, this dot props dot price. All right. Next up, and it's the last thing here. There's this some form information here. So we're going to just rebuild the entire form. I'll just delete all of that. And we'll start from the beginning, which is always a great place to start. So form action, I'll post all of this to chat as I get done with each line. /orders/populate, which is the URL that it hits when the form is submitted. And we want to give it the method post. Okay, so inside the form, we're going to add an input, give it the type number, class name title. The name of this input is quantity. We'll give it a min quantity of 1, means you can't order -12 of the product, and a default value, so the starting value is also going to be 1. Make sure that it's self-closing. And those numbers have to be in curly brackets, by the way. You might also be able to get away with doing it in string. I'm not 100% on that. Next line, we'll add a new input. This is going to be a hidden input because this is going to be the product ID. We'll give it a name. I said product ID, but it's actually variant_ID. And the value of it is going to be this.props.id. Make sure that it closes. All right, so we've got the quantity, we've got the ID, that's all we really need. So we're going to add a button to submit the form. So add a button tag. I'm going to give it the class names large and primary. I'll give it the ID add-to-cart-button. And the type of the button is submit. And we'll add to cart as the button text. And I'll post that into chat. Excellent. So I think that's everything we needed to do in the cart form. Let's give it a check. Refresh. Look at that. We have a cart form. It has a price, quantity field. Let's just order 10. All right, awesome. I'll empty my cart, head back to the product page. Okay, so we have just rebuilt the entire product page in ReactJS. Well, most of the product page in ReactJS. We skipped a few things, but those things are pretty easy to do once you have an idea of what you're doing. Now, there's one more thing that I wanted to cover if we had the time. It is 2:22. We've got about 8 minutes. I'll go through this pretty quickly. So I want to add a new feature to this product page using React and just give you guys an idea of what that might look like. It could be handy for some stores to have this price field adjust based on the quantity that you've selected. So if you selected 2, it would say like 38.98, I think is what that would be, and so on. So let's get that installed. In this cartform.js, this is where the quantity state is going to live. So by the way, we've been adding this constructor to every class that we have here under images and properties. It's not really used on any of those. You can delete them if you want to. It doesn't hurt anything. But so in cartform.js, we'll add a quantity state, and we will default it to 1 since that's what it should be when you first load the page. In the quantity field here, we're going to replace this default value with just value, and we'll set the value to be equal to this.state.quantity. So now if we were to reload the page, you would find that you couldn't actually adjust the quantity of what's in the quantity field because it's always going to be set to 1. So we need to add a function to update the quantity. Well, before we do that, while we're here in the input field, we're going to say onChange with a capital C. So anytime that this field changes, and in curly brackets, we're going to run that method that we're about to create, function rather, that we're about to create that changes the quantity. So this dot, and we'll just call it change quantity. So let's write that function. Change quantity, with a capital Q. We will pass in E, which is the element that's triggered this change. Oh, actually, let me make this self-binding. So there we go, that's better. And then in the interior, this dot set state, and we're setting the quantity state to be equal to e.target.value, which is the updated value of the field here. So now if we were to refresh the page, the quantity input would work as intended. So there's only one thing we need to do. We want to adjust this price based on the quantity selected. So that should be quite simple. This.props.price times this.state.quantity. And just for aesthetic purposes, I'm going to surround this in a set of parentheses, and then .to fixed with a capital F 2. And that just makes sure that you don't get like a million decimal points. It makes the decimal points, gosh, it constricts it down to 2 decimal points. That should be all we need to do. Wrong screen again. And it works. Awesome. So now we know if we were to order 13, it would cost us $259.87. Let's just quality check that, $259.87. Awesome. Guys, we did it. One last commit. Add quantity change. I think I actually included the cart form addition in that commit, but that's fine. And breathe. That's it, guys. We took some shortcuts, but for the most part, we've just rebuilt the entire product page in React. I hope that was a lot easier than you expected it to be, and I hope that maybe you're starting to see some of the benefits of using React. We are done with the coding portion of this, so I just want to take a second to reflect on what we've learned. So let's do a quick review. We can use the constructor to set the initial value of the state. We can use the this.setState function to update the state. Anytime the state updates, the elements using that state also update. We can use the component did mount function to run commands when the component mounts. There are also some other lifecycle methods like component did update that you'll need to know. One important roadblock in building a product page is if you have a product-to-product route when you install a router for React, the path won't actually update when you go to that new product page. So you would want to do something like component did update, check to see if the path has changed, and if the path has changed, then update the path state, and then retrigger the API call. So moving on, we can get our information from the APIs rather than from the controllers, which is how we would traditionally do it in Rails. We can pass information down to subcomponent as props. This can be anything from states, function, anything you want, really. And we can't, I say can't, but rather shouldn't, update props because those should be based off of the parent components that's sending it down. But we can pass down functions that we can use to update the state upstream. So it's 2:28 right on the dot. That's it for me, guys.